You're listening to the March 24th, 2016 edition of the Surfwatch Cyber Risk Roundup, the weekly podcast that's focused on how the world of cybercrime is impacting business. Hello everyone out there, I am Jeff Peters, Surfwatch Labs editor, and I am here with Matt Leifus, Surfwatch Labs writer. As always, this weekly podcast is brought to you by Surfwatch Labs, and every week we bring you the top 5 trending cybercrime events, advisories, and legal actions based on Surfwatch Labs data. So yeah, I'll throw it over to you, Matt, to get us started with the top most discussed cybercrime event this past week.
Well, not to add to the headlines that he already gets, but we're going to talk about Donald Trump to kick things off.
Woo!
Yeah, yeehaw! So last week we talked about how Anonymous said that they were going to launch a campaign against Donald Trump. And they promised to leak, some of his personal information. This attack was supposed to take place on April 1st. However, Anonymous claimed to have leaked some of his information, like his phone number, address, social security number. However, this information's old. Like this information was actually leaked back in 2013. Anonymous is saying that they did this little stunt here to test Donald Trump. Once Donald Trump, found out that Anonymous, they released all this information saying that they were going to, release data on him, he immediately was like calling for their arrest and all this stuff, and he didn't actually investigate what happened. Here's a quote from Anonymous. It kind of explains what's going on here. So the Trump campaign has accused us for hacking Trump and went even further by asking to arrest us for publishing information that was already public and online. Trump wants to turn America into a fascist dictatorship where anyone can be arrested for just posting old information online, end quote.
Yeah, these guys, they sound like idiots too. Because, obviously, they're saying that they're going to commit illegal activities. They have a whole promotion thing about it. Yeah, I'm just so sick of talking about it.
It sounds like it's a smear campaign. We'll see what actually happens on April 1st. I'm sure it's going to be the usual stuff with these guys. They're gonna launch denial of service attacks. A couple of his websites going to be knocked offline for an hour or two. They'll be back up. It'll make news because the Trump Tower website gets knocked offline, which already happened. But yeah, I don't know if anything's really going to come of it. And here's another thing with Anonymous. They've also issued a threat against Ted Cruz, the other presidential hopeful for the Republican Party. Actually, it sounds like the Republican Party's new choice for president. But they're saying that if Ted Cruz doesn't drop out of the race, they have some information. They're saying that they have evidence that he visits prostitutes quite often, which would be pretty damning because if anyone knows Ted Cruz, he's a religious. What's the word I'm trying to find? You know what I'm saying.
Yeah, I know what you're saying.
He's very religious, and it would be completely counterproductive to what he's trying to promote and what his platform that he's running on. And the last thing going on with Anonymous here, just some little side news. There's been a lot of news that there's kind of like a civil war starting right now in Anonymous over this campaign. If you follow Anonymous and even though they really don't have rules.
Well, it's like anyone can be a member of I could say I'm going to attack someone, hashtag anonymous. So that's why all this anonymous news
is kind of, yeah.
It's like, because any idiot can just say they're anonymous. It's not like a defined certain group or subset,
Right. Yeah. Well, everyone's talking about it. It's the top trending target.
Yeah,
talks about it. But there's like this civil war going on with the members of Anonymous because one of their unspoken rules is they don't try to get involved with politics, and they're clearly doing that here.
Moving on to some other actual attacks that happened this past week, we have the number 2 trending event, and this one really along with Donald Trump, this one really dominated our data. Just a lot of people talking about this. There was a few different Swedish newspaper websites that were cyber attacked. There was actually many different ones. I think there was about like a half dozen or so.
Yeah, there's like 7.
Yeah,
different
there's about
websites.
7 different publications. The report said that they were many of the main newspapers in Sweden. They were offline Saturday evening for about 3 hours. due to a DDoS attack. As far as I know, no one has claimed responsibility for this attack, and Swedish police are still investigating. We've seen a lot of news outlets being targeted with DDoS attacks. I mean, quite a bit, but just going back, another month or two, we saw the BBC, they were knocked offline to a DDoS attack, and so it's pretty common.
Yeah, that BBC one, I think, actually got a lot of recognition because it was kind of acknowledged as one of the it was a denial of service attack that in the traffic it was able to generate was of all-time high proportions.
Yeah, I
from
think
what I saw.
Like they were saying it was like 600 gigabits per second. But again, a lot of times people claim that they're doing much higher than they actually are. So I'm not sure what the actual numbers were, but I did see that number thrown out there in some headlines for the BBC one.
Coming in at number 3, we're going to get back to some hospital news. Hospitals have been a trending issue all through 2016 so far. We're going to talk about Methodist Hospital. This is a Kentucky-based hospital, and they declared an internal state of emergency after the healthcare provider suffered a ransomware attack. The criminals in this attack, they held the encrypted data ransom and demanded a payment to release the files. It's your, typical, that's what happens in ransomware. The systems director of Methodist Hospital, Jamie Reed, said the strain of malware used in this attack was the Locky ransomware variant. If you guys remember, we have discussed Locky. It's a newer strain of ransomware. It's making a lot of headlines. And I think there's been some news. There's been an update with this, hasn't there, Jeff? Aren't they? I think they're up and running now currently. I don't believe they ended up actually paying a ransom.
Yeah, the last I saw, I think was a day or two ago, they were quoted as saying they were in discussions with the FBI on whether they should pay or not. They said they didn't want to, obviously, unless it came to it. And I think that all they were asking for was about $1,600 worth of Bitcoin, which is a lot less. I think the Hollywood Presbyterian Hospital, I think that was in like January, February.
Yeah.
No, I think it was in February. That one, I think they paid like $17,000. So,
and they were initially asking for, I think, like over $1 million worth of Bitcoin, if I remember correctly.
Yeah. So yeah, that's the last I saw. I didn't see whether they actually paid or not. But as far as I know, the only I saw some quotes from their attorney. They said really the only effect it's had is downtime, and they've had to switch to a paper system and kind of go through some of the hassle of that. But yeah, I haven't seen if they've actually paid or not yet.
Yeah, and the other thing is, like I said before we got into this, hospitals, in 2016, the hospitals are not doing very well in terms of cybercrime. There's been, ransomware has been a big issue lately. There's also been, the typical lost laptop, USB, email errors. There's been a lot of news about hospitals. But specifically with ransomware, Ottawa Hospital was another big headline hospital that made news. This is back on March 12th. The hospital suffered a ransomware attack. Out of 10,000 computers used at the hospital, only 4 were affected. In this event, the hospital, like I said, they didn't pay a ransom, and they had all their files backed up, which is one of the most efficient ways to circumvent a ransomware attack.
I saw an article just, I think, yesterday saying that 2 more California hospitals were also targeted with ransomware attacks this week. So, yeah, it seems like it's becoming a pretty widespread problem.
It's a tongue twister.
Yeah. Moving on to the number 4 trending event, we have USA Cycling, and they were a victim of a cyber attack. Members of USA Cycling potentially had their personal information obtained. More than 62,000 members of the organization were sent emails about this breach. And according to that email, member names, mailing addresses, email addresses, birth dates, contact details, and passwords are at risk. USA Cycling believes it has a handle on the situation and that the data breach has been stopped, but the organization acknowledges it could have done more to protect member data. This is a quote from USA Cycling. They say, "We deeply regret that our member account passwords were not encrypted. We were aware of this need and have been exploring fixing that data security vulnerability for the last several months. But the legacy IT system we have been operating on for the past decade or more makes the transition very difficult and costly." Now, this is kind of interesting because usually, just from a legal perspective, you wouldn't see a company admitting fault or not living up to that.
Right. Yeah, that is pretty interesting. And it kind of sounds like we know that there's a cost to implementing cybersecurity. Hence it's one of the issues with it. Companies can't justify the cost of upgrading equipment and really making sure that they're protected and knowing their threats and things like that. I don't know, but when I saw this letter, I definitely don't feel sorry for them. It's that if you're going to be an organization, you're going to have member information, you're expected to protect that information. You should be doing everything in your power to keep that information protected.
It's funny you say that because that kind of ties into our next target, the story about this water treatment plant being hit with a cyber attack. This story was from Verizon. They recently released a report about kind of like a behind the scenes of some of their investigations. They didn't release the name or anything of this water treatment plant, but Verizon says the breach happened because the water company had been using the same operating systems for over a decade to run its entire IT network, and because the entire IT network relied on a single ancient application system server released back in 1988. So
Wow.
You talk about not updating.
Wow. Okay. And that's just that. And now we're just talking critical infrastructure. That's not important to govern or update or anything like that.
Well, and this story is interesting because we always hear about critical infrastructure, and I've heard for so long they could do all these things to water plants. But this is one of the first stories I've seen in the news where they were talking about. Basically, they said a group of hackers managed to infiltrate this water treatment plant and change the levels of chemicals being used to treat tap water 4 times. So the way that they got in was through a vulnerability in the web accessible payment system, and then they used that to get into the company's web server. And the researchers say that they actually had access to over 2.5 million customer records, but apparently they never sought to do anything with those accounts. And they also said the hackers didn't even likely realize that they were manipulating these tap water chemicals. They were just playing around in there. So thankfully no one got ill, nothing really happened, but they went on to say in the report that this breach was serious and could have easily been more critical, if the threat actors had a little more time and a little more knowledge of ICS and SCADA systems. The water company and the local community could have suffered serious consequences.
That's kind of scary when you think about it.
And everyone talks about critical infrastructure all the time. Ted Koppel just released a book not too long ago, kind of like a doomsday scenario of everything that could happen. But yeah, we usually don't see actual stories of incidents like these happening. So
yeah, we haven't heard of that. Now we've read the fear mongering articles when we talk about these doomsday scenarios and things like that, but yeah, nothing's actually really been reported to have happened, like you said. So that's a little concerning in my mind. Before we move on to advisories, we have an update from American Express. Now, it was either last week or the week before, we had talked about American Express and that they suffered a data breach. There's been a little bit of confusion among some news outlets, and the story got a little confused. So here's a quote from American Express about this whole event. The incident American Express reported to the California Attorney General on March 10th was not a breach of any American Express environment or service provider, but rather was a merchant breach. We inadvertently filed an incorrect version of the customer notice with the California Attorney General, which is being corrected. And this breach, and this is probably where the main confusion was, this whole event that American Express was even talking about occurred back in December of 2013. And a lot of people thought that this was something that recently happened, so there's a little bit of confusion.
Well, yeah, and initially they said it was a third-party supplier or some kind of third party, some unnamed third party. So people were speculating about what that was, and there's a lot of articles, and we even talked about it on this podcast. I think we talked about the article on CSO Online. Apparently it wasn't a supplier or anything. It was just a merchant breach that affected some American Express cards. Moving on to the top 5 advisories from the past week. We have an update from Secunia. We've interviewed them a few times. They always do the reports on software vulnerabilities, and they released their latest software vulnerability report, and they found that more than 16,000 software bugs were detected in 2015. It's a healthy amount.
That is a big amount.
And this number, to give it a little context, that is a 2% increase from the year before, and a 39% increase from back in 2010. So they break these bugs down into different categories. So if you just kind of want a high-level view of what's going on, 45.6% of the vulnerabilities were categorized as less critical. That was by far the majority. And then moderately critical vulnerabilities were about a quarter, 25.5%. Highly critical vulnerabilities were 13.3%. And the most severe vulnerabilities were only 0.5%. So the big ones were pretty rare compared to, all the other vulnerabilities out there. But shockingly, more than half of the vulnerabilities can be exploited remotely over the internet. So that was
that's
something
not
to be
that's
concerned
not
about.
the best of news. Knowing that some of these vulnerabilities can be exploited from a guy sitting 1,000 miles away in Russia, that's always a concern. Moving on to the next advisory, we're going to talk about employees and their willingness to sell their corporate passwords.
This was a pretty surprising headline when I saw it this week.
This was. This is a survey from SailPoint, and it really kind of tells a story about insider activity, and it's pretty alive and well according to the results of this. According to the SailPoint survey, 20% of respondents said that they would be willing to sell their corporate passwords. Almost half of those respondents said they would be willing to sell their passwords for cheap and were not interested in negotiating for a price of more than $1,000. Think about that. Now, I don't actually have specifics on how much like a breach costs. We've talked about that before. I can't think of it off the top of my head, but it's a lot of money on average. And for $1,000, they're willing to sell their password. The damage that a criminal could do with that.
Yeah, and it's even worse when you look at some of the other stats from the survey, because 65% of respondents say that they reuse passwords for multiple work-related apps. So you give them password for one thing, now they have the password for multiple things. And 32% said that they share their password with coworkers. Another thing, and we've talked about this on the podcast, the importance of making sure you have policies in place to remove users' access once they leave the company. According to the SailPoint survey, 42% of respondents said that they use credentials to access previous employers' networks. I mean, that's almost half. That's right. That's a huge amount.
That's crazy.
So you really have to be on top of making sure that you're following these proper precautions when it comes to current employees, but especially previous employees.
Right.
And this survey it included 1,000 workers in private companies across the U.S., UK, France, Germany, Austria, and the Netherlands.
Moving on, we got a Locky ransomware update. This Locky ransom has been in the news a lot lately. It's a new ransomware, like I said. And this advisory is specifically about how the delivery method of Locky ransomware. This latest update is from Palo Alto Networks. They published details about this new development of Locky ransomware. The ransomware is now being installed through the Nuclear Exploit Kit. Initially, attackers were distributing this malware using Microsoft Office documents with malicious macros to download and execute the ransomware. Attackers quickly added another tactic, sending emails with zip attachments containing malicious JavaScript files to accomplish the same goal. However, exploit kits have also been used to infect users with Locky from casual web browsing. Now, the reason this is such a big deal, Locky ransomware is making, like I said, a lot of headlines. You're already seeing it being used in some of these hospital breaches. One of the most prominent ways so when we're talking like Tesla Crypt or some of the other ransomwares, one of the most popular ways that you hear about them being spread are through exploit kits. Locky ransomware has made a name for itself without doing that. And now it's doing that. So in the future, we're not done hearing about this ransomware. I guarantee you it's going to be used a lot more, and you're going to hear a lot more stories about how companies are being affected by it.
Yeah, and our number 4 trending advisory is kind of related to this. One of the ways that this Locky ransomware is getting spread is through the use of malicious Microsoft Office macros. And that's been a pretty popular method for infecting people for a long time now. And it's really made a resurgence the last year or two. And Microsoft, they've responded to this resurgence in using this tactic. and they have added a new option just this week in Office 2016. And now administrators can block macros from running in Word, Excel, and PowerPoint documents that originate from the internet. I read a good article on InfoWorld about this, and they said that Microsoft Office has long included a setting to block macros in all documents. However, obviously just blocking everything indiscriminately is not practical for many enterprises because macros can serve a legitimate purpose, and they're useful in certain business workflows. So that's why Microsoft has come up with this new solution, which many people are saying is much better, because you can have a group policy setting that administrators can use to disable macros only for files obtained from any internet websites, including, Microsoft OneDrive, Google Drive, Dropbox, a lot of those places where malicious actors try to store these malicious files. And talking about the Locky ransomware, we interviewed Proofpoint's Kevin Epstein on the CyberChat podcast, Surfwatch Labs' other podcast, a couple weeks ago. And we asked him about the prevalence of these malicious macros, and he said that they're larger now than they've ever been. And he also said that their data, a lot of it was tied to these Dridex actors who were using these macros to distribute the Dridex banking Trojan, and then more recently they've switched over to using Locky ransomware. So something you should be aware of, this is pretty popular, both attack vector and type of ransomware, and that's one of the ways these threat actors are distributing it is through these malicious macros.
And our number 5 top trending advisory, we get a new internet service provider impersonation scam. Now these are pretty routine. We've seen them before. The twist on this is that scammers are using malvertising techniques to infect systems with an IP sniffing software in order to find out what internet service provider the victim is using. Once this information is obtained, a fake tech support page is loaded on a user's computer with the following warning, and we'll just use Verizon as an example. Verizon customer, our system scans have detected malicious spyware on your computer. Your personal photos, credit card information, and passwords may be at risk. Contact our certified technicians for immediate assistance. And that's the warning that they'd say. This is pretty typical of these scams, this part. When users call the number provided, they're linked to somewhere. In this case, it's a call center in India. And at this point, the scammers attempt to sell products to the victim that are not needed.
Now moving on to our top 5 trending settlements, lawsuits, and other legal news. We'll start off with some news from the FTC. There was a few different items this week. The first one was the FTC has issued a warning to 12 developers who have installed Silverpush code in their Android apps. Now, what is Silverpush? Silverpush is a piece of software that can monitor a device's microphone to listen for audio signals emitted by TVs. And these are known as audio beacons. So these beacons, or these audio beacons, are embedded in television advertisements. So essentially, if your user's device is on and you have this code, the software is capable of producing a detailed log of the television content that is viewed for the purposes of targeted advertising and analytics.
That's interesting. I've never heard of that before.
I thought you would like this story because I know you're big on privacy and net neutrality.
A little bit. I don't want people knowing my business. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Now, the good news is that Silverpush, they've publicly stated that the service is not currently in use in the United States, but the FTC is being proactive and sending these letters out, basically saying that if the application does end up enabling third parties to monitor the television viewing habits of U.S. consumers and your statements or user interface stated or implied otherwise, this could constitute a violation of the Federal Trade Commission Act. So basically they're kind of warning, hey, you're not doing anything yet, but just keep in mind if this does come to the U.S., you better make sure you're providing the proper disclaimers to let people know that you're basically sniffing out all their TV habits.
Right.
Yeah, so that was one piece of news. And then another thing, Jessica Rich, she is the director of the FTC's Bureau for Consumer Protection, and she was testifying before Congress this week on Tuesday, and she was talking a bit about basically the rise in all these smart health apps. A lot of people wear those little like Fitbit trackers and stuff, as well as all these apps on your phone. And basically this has led to this surge in unregulated health data. And she just stressed that the FTC is going to continue to utilize its authority in order to protect consumers on that front. And she testified that, quote, many of the entities creating these new consumer-facing products and services are not covered by HIPAA, because that only provides protections for health information held or generated by certain covered entities. But then she went on to say that the entities creating these new products, however, are within the FTC's jurisdiction in most instances. So even though it might not be a HIPAA violation to share some of that data, the FTC is basically saying, just put out some warnings out there this week to make sure you got your act together.
Right. Moving on with the number 2 trending legal advisory. Not long ago, we were talking about a data breach at 21st Century Oncology. And as the natural progression of these data breaches go, I think there should almost be like a plan. You know, like what is it? Like what are the stages of grief? We have like the stages of the data breach.
Yeah, we should come up with that. That'd be a good blog post.
Yeah, it would be. We're on to the lawsuit stage of 21st Century Oncology data breach. Matter of fact, 3 class action lawsuits have been filed against 21st Century Oncology, and again, this is over their data breach that impacted more than 2 million patients. The lawsuits claim the company failed to take adequate cybersecurity measures and delayed notifying those affected for more than several months. And I remember that because we were actually talking about how the FBI notified them and it took them a little bit. And so a little recap on that. The FBI did notify 21st Century Oncology back in November 13th, 2015 about the breach, but the healthcare provider waited until March 4th to notify patients. Their reasoning behind that was they were saying that the FBI asked them to delay notifying patients until the investigation was completed.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting when I read that because, I mean, there's a few different lawsuits and there's a few different reasons behind the lawsuits, but one of them was that they took so long to notify people. But at least according to the company, they said the FBI told them not to. So it doesn't seem like very sound legal reasoning, if assuming what this company said is true.
Right. Yeah. I mean, we'll see how it goes. I mean, maybe they're telling a little white lie. Maybe the FBI didn't actually tell them to. Who knows? Who knows what happens with these? All I know is that we have seen examples where a company took way longer than even this time period to notify people of a breach. But that is pretty egregious. I mean, what is that? 3 months, 4 months?
A little over 3.5.
Yeah.
No, 2.5.
Well, hold on.
3.5.
Everyone out there, where Jeff and I are trying to do basic math. Hold on real quick.
Let's see,
November, December, January, February. No.
You know what?
No.
I was skipping December. I went November. Oh, man.
Okay.
I really am smart, I promise.
Yeah. We really are. No, we got it. We're good. We can move on. Sorry.
So moving on to the number 3 trending legal item. I can't remember if we brought this up on the podcast or not. I know I definitely read about it. But Costco, they are being sued for violating the Fair and Accurate Credit Transactions Act. And what happened is a plaintiff, she alleges that back in January 2016, she was given a store receipt that showed the first 6 and the last 4 digits of her credit card number. So this is in violation of that 2003 law, which states that you can only display the last 5 digits of a payment card on a point-of-sale receipt. An update here is that Costco, they are now arguing that the Fair and Accurate Credit Transactions Act does not apply in this case, because apparently what happened is she went to leave Costco and she couldn't find her initial receipt. And, they check your receipt at the doors there. She went back and a supervisor actually printed her off they call it a report, itemizing her purchases. And this report apparently had the excess credit card numbers on there. And they're arguing that this receipt does not qualify as a point-of-sale receipt because it was printed away from the register and it was requested by the plaintiff herself.
Okay, so if that's true, and you kind of look at this whole story, what's this person after then? That's immediately what comes to mind. If that's true that she went back in because she was looking for a receipt,
Well, because if you ever shop at like those big, like the Costco, Sam's Club, you can't just walk out the door. You have to show them your receipt, and they take the highlighter. So she was going to leave the store, and I think, from my understanding, she didn't have a receipt, so she must have paid for it, lost it. So then they obviously weren't going to let her walk out the front door, and then she had to go back and get the receipt.
That's a little better then. I thought it was something like, she left the store, like wanted the receipt, came back in, and then they tried to help her, and they gave her this, it's something that's a little more detailed, and she's throwing a fit about it.
The only thing is, they're calling it that they printed her off a itemized report. Now, is that just a little legal wordplay when it's really basically a receipt?
Yeah.
Because that's what a receipt is, basically, an itemized report. So I don't know if they're trying to spin it. Because apparently, according to Costco, this law doesn't define what a point-of-sale receipt is within the law. So they're kind of trying to say it's not a point-of-sale receipt. But to me, it seems like it's just best practices all around to just not print more than it could potentially get you in legal trouble.
That's interesting. Moving on to number 4, top trending legal issue, we have a Chinese national pleads guilty to hacking defense contractors. So we have this 50-year-old Chinese citizen pleaded guilty yesterday to his role in the criminal conspiracy to steal military technical data. This includes data related to the C-17 strategic transport aircraft and certain fighter jets produced in the U.S. military. The man provided guidance on what persons, companies, and technologies to target and helped his co-conspirator identify which files to seal. He was arrested in Canada in July 2014, and he's scheduled to be sentenced in July.
And then another arrest that we saw. I know a few podcasts ago you were asking what happened to the Syrian Electronic Army.
Yeah.
Well, if you're wondering what's going on with the SEA, 3 members of the Syrian Electronic Army have been charged with crimes by the Department of Justice. 2 of those who have been accused, a 22-year-old and a 27-year-old, have also been added to the FBI's Cyber Most Wanted list. So they get a little street cred for that, except for the $100,000 reward for information leading to their arrest. I'm always interested to see if these rewards inspire people to actually turn on each other. In these complaints, they are accused of taking over many different accounts and defacing many different websites, a hoax terrorist attack, extortion, fraud, and other things. So it'll be interesting to see what happens to them. All right, and that wraps up this week's top trending cybercrime events, advisories, and legal actions. Before we wrap up the podcast, we have our funny story of the week.
I like to talk about passwords quite a bit. There's been a lot of newsworthy articles out there around passwords. For instance, a lot of companies are leaning towards using biometric authentication. There's password managers, and then companies like Yahoo are trying to get rid of passwords altogether and just go with like a 2-factor authentication type of thing.
And there's also the selfie authentication.
There's the selfie. That's right. Yeah. That's right. However, when you look at the big picture here, passwords, no matter how you lean on this, they're not doing so well. We talk quite a bit about how people use the dumbest passwords alive. We've run down the list of the 10 top passwords. Almost universally, number 1 always comes down to like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, or something like that. Today, I wanted to talk about the top 10 worst sport fan passwords that are used out there. Number 1. Do you think you could guess what number 1 is? If you think, all right, I'll give you a hint. It's America's new pastime in sports, and it's not baseball.
Football.
Hey, football. FOOTBAL. That is the number 1 worst password used by sports fans, followed by baseball, hockey, soccer, golfer. Then after that, you have Yankees, Jordan, Chelsea, which I'm assuming is a soccer team, Rangers, and then the number 10 was NASCAR. These are all very, very simple passwords. I mean, if you're going to do football, how about football ! 1? If you want to go that simple, just something.
That wraps up this week's Surfwatch Cyber Risk Roundup. As always, the Cyber Risk Roundup is brought to you by Surfwatch Labs. Surfwatch Labs delivers cyber risk intelligence solutions that help organizations understand the potential for cyber attacks, determine the impact of their business, and proactively address threats head-on. For weekly interviews with cyber experts, check out Surfwatch Labs' other podcast, The Cyber Chat, And for more information on cyber risk intelligence, check out surfwatchlabs.com.